Atlanta News First presents First Alert Weather, the year in weather.
Happy holidays. I'm First Alert Chief Meteorologist Jennifer Valdez. 2023 has been quite the year in weather here in Georgia. From tornadoes to storms to flooding and everything in between. Unfortunately, we've seen it all this year. And it's our job as meteorologists to keep you and your family safe. The First Alert team of meteorologists, we're hard at work making sure you, the viewer, are informed whenever severe weather threatens the area. Today, we're going to take a look back at the year in weather and all of the close calls that impacted us directly or indirectly. The year started off rough, with a dozen confirmed tornadoes across north and middle Georgia on Thursday, January 12th. The severe storms spawned several strong, long-track tornadoes.
We are wall-to-wall in extended coverage.
The First Alert team was on the air nonstop, giving you the exact location of when extreme weather would hit your area. Big tornado on the ground, moving quickly to the east. It was determined that 3 tornadoes were on the ground at the same time in southwestern Spalding and Pike counties.
All I see was gravel flying everywhere and like cloud, like woo.
The strongest was an EF3 with estimated peak winds of 150 miles an hour. That tornado tore through Pike, Spalding, and Henry counties and was on the ground for almost 32 miles.
The tree snapped, this one up here snapped up top, that one fell over.
18 people were injured. The aftermath was devastating. Homes were destroyed, businesses ruined. The Hobby Lobby on Highway 92 suffered severe damage to the roof and exterior walls. The homes across the street looked even worse. To help those devastated by the storms, Atlanta News First teamed up with the Salvation Army to raise money for those impacted by the storms. Together, we raised more than $10,000 to help those who needed it most. It's not the way we wanted to start 2023, but an important reminder that severe weather and tornadoes can happen year-round in Georgia.
Rounds of heavy rain possible.
This is why the First Alert Weather Team is the largest in the southeastern United States. We are working tirelessly year-round to keep you and your family safe and help even after the storm has passed. Chief Meteorologist Jennifer Valdez, Atlanta News First.
Oh my gosh. No!
As the cataclysmic eye wall of Major Hurricane Ellia was brushing the Florida coastline, severe weather was spreading into the deep south and conditions were going downhill across coastal Georgia. Tybee Island, about 20 miles east of Savannah, was preparing for its 7th significant tropical threat in as many years.
We were out here just bagging for people who can't bag, so getting a little exercise and getting some bags out here for people to come pick them up. Preparation in the cities, they've dumped sand where it could possibly come in through the back.
Like inland Florida, there was a concern for widespread inland tree damage and extended power outages as hurricane-force winds are forecast to spread as far inland as South Georgia and portions of the Georgia coastal empire. The worst of the wind occurred across far South Georgia, especially in and around Valdosta. One Georgian, unfortunately, was killed after a tree was blown onto their car. Hundreds of trees were down and power was out for nearly a week in some South Georgia communities. Gusts also damaged the pecan crop and cost the area crucial agribusiness. On the coast, it was the risk of an extremely high storm tide and major coastal flooding that had residents preparing. Water from the sky, water from the sea, blasting the Georgia coast like a pressure washer to a sidewalk. Feeder bands rotating around the center of Ellia prompted several tornado warnings around the greater Savannah metro area. 2 tornadoes touched down further north, closer to Charleston, as Ellia moved northeastward. Inland wind gusts peaked in the manageable 35 to 45 mile per hour range across coastal Georgia. In the city of Savannah, wind gusted between 40 and 60 miles per hour. A nearly 70 mile per hour wind gust was measured on the north end of Tybee Island as the remnants of western Ellia made its closest pass. Rain was minimal along Georgia's barrier islands, while flooding occurred just a few counties inland as Idalia's northwest side became dominant, dumping 5 to 10 inches of rain from Valdosta to Vidalia on up to Statesboro.
What did you think when you first saw the tree in the street?
I was like, is this real? And then I saw it, and the sidewalk is like poured out, and I've never seen that before.
As the sun set and Idalia moved on, tree debris was strewn over the streets of Savannah. Toppled trees knocked out power to thousands in Chatham County alone. Major Hurricane Idalia, a rapidly strengthening storm that won't be forgotten anytime soon across Florida, portions of Georgia, and the Carolinas. Cutter Martin, Atlanta News First.
Idalia originated in the Caribbean before making its way into the very warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico, which fueled this storm, eventually strengthening it into a major Category 3 storm as it barreled towards the Big Bend region of Florida. This storm, packing winds of 125 miles per hour. Our crew traveled down to Steinhatchee, Florida, along the Gulf Coast as residents braced for impact.
But I do want to note, over my shoulder, you see the dark clouds off on the horizon, some of that rain falling. That is the first outer rain band that is going to start to make its way in. And then, as I direct you over my shoulder here, this Steinhatchee River here leads out to the Gulf of Mexico, where, of course, Idalia is currently brewing and strengthening.
The storm continued, ultimately making landfall near Keaton Beach, Florida on August 30th around 7:45 in the morning, carrying winds at its core of 125 miles per hour. The thing that was the most remarkable about Idalia for this specific part of Florida is it is the first major hurricane on record to hit the Big Bend region of Florida. Of course, Florida, no stranger to hurricanes or major hurricanes, but this particular part of the state had never experienced a storm of this magnitude. Not only was wind an issue, but also the storm surge. Whenever you're talking coastal areas, storm surge is going to be a concern. And Idalia brought upwards of 12 feet of storm surge for Taylor and Dixie counties. This storm brought back a lot of memories for residents in the area who've lived there since the early 90s, as the storm of the century back in March of 1993. Dissimilar in the fact that it is not a hurricane, but so its anatomy not the same, but its impacts very similar. It originated along the Gulf Coast near Louisiana. This low pressure system pushed along the Gulf Coast, and it did bring storm surge comparable to Idalia, along with hurricane force winds, again, back in March of 1993. So people who had lived here, when they saw Idalia coming and saw what it could bring, this is the memory that got brought back, was the storm of the century. So again, not a hurricane, but definitely brought hurricane impacts to that area.
Oh my gosh. No!
Now, Idalia continued to move inland, passing very close to Perry, Florida, which is where our crew eventually traveled to get close to the heart of the storm.
Currently in the eye wall of Hurricane Idalia. The wind has been whipping. The power is out. Tree limbs have been flying down the street.
The storm quickly passed, and as skies cleared, residents came out to assess the damage, and the community quickly realized they had a big cleanup process ahead of them.
I think, we've already started to come together. Everybody's checking on everybody. We've got a great community here, so I think we're all just going to help each other out however long it does take.
Thankfully, the storm moved so quickly through the Big Bend region of Florida that inland flooding was not a huge concern, but the storm continued on northward, making its way into Georgia, where it definitely left its mark.
Up next, why this year's hurricane season started earlier than expected, but didn't necessarily break any records. Plus, a major storm packs a wallop in mere minutes. We're going to explain why we can't blame all the flooding on Mother Nature.
My car is completely submerged, and now this is what she looks like.
Like 5 feet. It was 5 feet, seriously.
Turn your head! Turn your head!
This could be it. I can't open a window, and the doors wouldn't open.
Dangerous, swift, fatal. Flash floods can occur within minutes or hours of heavy rainfall events. Most flash floods are caused by slow-moving thunderstorms or multiple thunderstorms tracking over the same area over a short period of time. According to the National Weather Service, the 30-year average for deaths in the United States associated with flash floods is 127 per year. Nearly half of those deaths are vehicle-related fatalities.
Yeah, we were reminded of how quickly flash flooding could occur here in Atlanta on September 14th. Thankfully, there was no loss of life, But many people were reminded of why we always say, turn around, don't drown. Per the National Weather Service's observations, some locations received over 3 4/10 inches of rain during this event. Most of this fell in a 2-hour period. Now, just for a little bit of perspective, the normal or most likely value for this 2-hour period would be about 1 6/10 inches. That means that on this day, September 14th, we picked up roughly 2 times as much rainfall as we would expect in a normal event. This rate qualifies as a 50-year rainfall event, or an event that would only have about a 2% chance of occurring. Now, here's a breakdown of how this event unfolded on that afternoon. And we were here in the First Alert Weather Center tracking these storms around noon, these showers moving in so slowly to the heart of Atlanta, roughly 1 to 3 o'clock. You can see that all of these neighborhoods from Bolton into Brookwood, Georgia Tech, Clark Atlanta, Mercedes-Benz Stadium, that whole area just had round after round of slow moving rain just dumped on them. By the time this was all over, we had estimates of roughly 2 to 3 inches of rain across most of this region in about an hour and a half to 2 hours. So no wonder why this was the area that we saw some of the strangest and scariest images.
No wonder the storm drainage system was overloaded. This was not a normal event. According to the City of Atlanta's Department of Watershed Management, the stormwater systems are designed to manage flows for 70% of normal storm events. With so much rain falling so quickly, runoff could not occur fast enough, and multiple locations across Atlanta experienced significant flooding. It's always important to know your risks. While all floods can't be prevented, we can reduce our risks. Helping the city keep storm drains clean ahead of heavy rainfall events is one way, and it can go a long way. But in order to be a part of the solution, you have to know when those storms are in the forecast. The First Alert Weather app can keep you and your family aware and safe. Meteorologist Patrick Peete, Atlanta News First.
So this hurricane season actually started before we even realized it. The National Hurricane Center announced in May that we actually had our first storm back in January when an unnamed tropical storm developed just 300 miles southeast of Massachusetts. Now, this storm did not produce any damage in the United States, but the winds in this were at 70 miles per hour, so it was fairly close to a hurricane. And if you're thinking January 16th is a little early, you would be absolutely correct. This is way outside of our traditional hurricane season, which starts on June 1st in the Atlantic. But once we got to June 1st and got into our traditional hurricane season, we had 3 tropical cyclones that made landfall in the United States. The first was Tropical Storm Harold, which made landfall in South Texas on August 22nd. Harold had 50 mile per hour winds, but more importantly, it brought some much needed rain for Texas at the time. Then about a week later, there was Ellia, which we covered very heavily here on Atlanta News First. Ellia was a major hurricane that made landfall along the Big Bend region of Florida with 125 mile per hour winds.
Oh my gosh.
And Ellia actually became a Category 4 hurricane before thankfully weakening a bit right before it made landfall back on August 30th. And then there was Tropical Storm Ophelia, which made landfall along the coast of North Carolina back on September the 22nd. Ophelia had 70 mile per hour winds, so while a tropical storm, very close to a hurricane. So these were the 3 tropical cyclones that made landfall in the United States, but Harold, Ellia, and Ophelia were a part of a very active season overall for the Atlantic, which included 20 storms this season. For perspective, we typically see 14 storms each season, so definitely an above average season. Speaking of 14, last year we had exactly 14 storms, which is average, and that's the only year that we have seen a season that hasn't been above average going back to 2015. So we've had a lot of above average seasons, and one of the reasons why is because of this. All this orange that you see, and even this pink as you go into the Caribbean, those are very warm ocean temperatures, and it's not the only thing that influences hurricanes, but it definitely plays a major role. Whenever you have these super warm water temperatures, that's fuel for tropical cyclone development. So what we didn't see this season was a tropical cyclone move directly through North Georgia, which was certainly good, but that has happened in the past. In fact, the last time it happened was last year when Tropical Depression Nicole impacted us directly here in North Georgia. You're not having to worry about that anymore as hurricane season coming to an end, but of course we'll keep you up to date on all things weather in the First Alert Weather app.
Coming up, a look ahead at what you can expect this winter and into the coming year.
As you'll see in this special, we have had our share of wild weather in Georgia in 2023. From winter tornadoes to a strong tropical system and devastating flooding. There have been a few extreme events. As a whole, though, this year has been warm and dry. A holiday deep freeze at the end of 2022 gave way to a balmy January in North Georgia. While the warmer temperatures were appreciated by many, the severe weather that accompanied them was not. A dozen tornadoes tore through North and Middle Georgia on January 12th. It was all part of a wet and mild month that saw the temperature soar to nearly 7 degrees above normal, with over 1.5 times the normal precipitation. The warm weather rolled into February, and it became even more extreme as record highs in the low 80s were set on 2 days during the month. It's in the books as the second warmest February on record in Atlanta. Once March and spring rolled around, the temperature trended back to near normal, and eventually we saw some cooler than normal weather in May. We also saw a big explosion of pollen in early March, sooner than normal because of the very warm weather in January and February. The two coldest months this year, relative to normal of course, were May and June. Both were about a degree below normal. The back half of the summer, though, was hot, with July, August, and September all warmer than normal. The temperature in Atlanta has reached at least 90 degrees on 65 days in 2023. That's nearly 20 days above the 30-year average and the highest total since the record-setting year back in 2019. The second half of 2023 hasn't just been characterized by warm weather, it has also been very dry. There were localized heavy thunderstorms this summer, one of which we heard about earlier in the show, but more often than not, the weather has been dry since July. From July 1st to November 1st, Atlanta got just 62% of the normal rain, and the deficit was even greater in northwest Georgia. The drought is extreme and exceptional in the northern part of the state. There has not been an extreme drought in North Georgia in the past 4 years, and it's been 7 years since we've seen an exceptional drought in this state. The global weather pattern is shifting, and as we're about to find out, relief from the dry conditions could be on the way sooner rather than later.
In order to give you a forecast for this upcoming winter, we got to talk about El Nino. El Nino is a pattern in the Pacific Ocean that has to do with the movement of warm ocean water. Usually the trade winds, which blow from east to west in this area, push the warm pool of water towards Australia, so across the Pacific Ocean. But in El Nino years, those trade winds weaken, so the warm pool of water actually comes closer to the South American coast, and that warm pool of water has a major impact on the jet stream, which in turn has a major impact on weather all over the world. But especially here in the United States, our weather is impacted by El Nino in the winter months, and we are headed into a pretty strong El Nino this year. So this is typically what we see. The northern United States is usually very warm, and the Great Lakes region in El Nino years is dry. Now, in the south, it's usually wetter than average, and in the southeast, it's colder than average during El Nino years. So first and foremost, we think it's going to be wet and cooler than average. Now, the Climate Prediction Center has issued the rain outlook for December, January, and February, and you can see it does tap into that El Nino forecast. Georgia is expected to see above average precipitation. What does that mean? Well, we're likely to see a lot of rainfall events, and that does also increase our chances of snowfall events. So with all that being said, here is my winter 2023-2024 forecast. December is usually the wettest month for us here in Metro Atlanta, so I expect a lot of rain, probably a lot of gray days, probably won't see the sun shine very much, and we should be able to put a dent in our current drought. In January, I'm expecting very cold, frigid conditions with multiple snowfall events, maybe even an ice event. And Winter is likely to linger all the way through February. Sometimes we start to see more mild conditions in the back half of winter. I do not expect that this year. I think it's going to be cold and very wet, possibly another snow or two, and winter will likely linger into March. So gear up, get those coats ready. This winter is going to be pretty harsh.
As you can see, 2023 was a very active year, and with the expectation that our winter will be active as well, with more cold air and more storm systems rolling through, it is more important than ever to download our First Alert Weather app. That way, you can have the Southeast's largest team of meteorologists in the palm of your hand and get the most accurate latest forecast whenever you need it. Just go to the App Store and get the First Alert Weather app. On behalf of the entire First Alert team, I hope you have a very happy holiday.
Atlanta News First presents First Alert Weather, the year in weather.
Happy holidays. I'm First Alert Chief Meteorologist Jennifer Valdez. 2023 has been quite the year in weather here in Georgia. From tornadoes to storms to flooding and everything in between. Unfortunately, we've seen it all this year. And it's our job as meteorologists to keep you and your family safe. The First Alert team of meteorologists, we're hard